Coming up next on Arizona Horizon's Journalists Roundtable, the first gubernatorial debate is in the books. We'll discuss who won, who lost, and what was learned. And the Arizona Chamber of Commerce backs a Democrat for statewide office. Those stories and more next on the Journalists Roundtable.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon's Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ted Simons. Joining us tonight, Luigi Del Puerto of the Arizona Capital Times, Howard Fisher of Capital Media Services, and Bob Christie of the Associated Press. Fred Duval and Doug Ducey went at it in their first face-to-face debate this week. Luigi, looked like education, maybe economy, the focus here?
Education and economy obviously are the big focuses of this debate. Nothing surprising about these two candidates' position. What we see is a stark contrast in how they view the government, how they view spending, and what they want to do. And both of them, of course, want to improve the state's economy, but there are some clear differences that we've known all along. I think they're both very articulate, did pretty well. I think Duval probably needed this debate more than Ducey. Ducey has been out there. He's a beneficiary of the primary, and so Duval probably needs to do more of these debates to compare and contrast himself.
Well, I think he needs to define himself, not just compare and contrast. And where we saw was he's decided that education is the key. That we can talk all we want about cutting taxes. We can talk all we want about attracting big business. Companies aren't going to come here until we have good education. We've shorted schools $300 million a year for 4 or 5 years. We owe them the money. Let's pay them the money. Let's invest. And what we hear from Doug Ducey is, well, yeah, the courts did rule, but I'll tell you what, let's just drag this out a little while longer, and then we'll see if we can revamp the structure of how the money's paid out, and saying, trust me, because I'll have a plan for how we're going to redo the money, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah, and that's real difficult for Doug Ducey because he has, he's campaigned. His signature line is, "I've run a company. I've grown a company. Now I'm going to shrink a government." And he was asked repeatedly, "Okay, what are you going to shrink?" And he would not answer those questions. He says, "Well, I'm going to go through the budget line by line." Well, he's a state treasurer for the last 4 years. He ought to know that budget backwards and forwards and know where he wants to cut, and he didn't answer the question.
But to be fair, neither really did Duval. I mean, when you pushed him for how you're going to come up with the money, particularly after the first year, he said, procurement reform. I'm sorry, those are nickels in the couch. Or maybe we'll privatize the lottery. But
he did mention using the rainy day fund.
Well, understood, but that's the first year. That's exactly the point.
That's one-time money.
Yeah, you've got $450 million in the rainy day fund. If you put out $300 million.
He mentioned state trust land, which is up, I think it's 4.5. Ducey mentioned state trust land. That's been floating around as a solution to this. State trust land fund is now back up to $4.5 billion or so.
So we have a lot of big ideas out there, but we don't have a lot in the way of how to incorporate those big ideas in the real world.
Right, because this is really where the realities of running a government, clashes with campaign rhetoric. I mean, what you have is that a state that will have a deficit next year. That's not to mention the court-ordered K-12 funding that will have to come up with money for that, but our resources really are not enough to cover our expenses. That's the very first thing that they will have, either one will have to solve on day one. That starts next session.
And that's where it gets tricky because, of course, Ducey says right out the gate, I will not raise taxes. Duval sort of said he won't, but you've got the key point. We have cut taxes, as Duval said, 24 of the last 25 years. Because that was going to be the key. We should be swimming in jobs. Well, take a look at our job recovery, and it isn't there. So the question becomes, how do we do this? Do we want the government? If we want a $6 billion government, we can do that. If you get rid of maybe a university, or maybe a couple of prisons or things like that. But you've got to decide if you want government, if you want education, you want K-12, how do you pay for it?
And we should mention, taxes have been cut. Those income taxes have been cut for 23, 24 a year, something like that. Recently, taxes were raised because the citizenry said, I think I understand for education, we need that penny sales tax for 3 years.
That's right, and that's why we're in this education mess that we're in. We managed to get over the recession with this temporary sales tax. It went away. They tried to make it permanent, but they cut $300,000 out of education during the recession illegally. And so now they've got to backfill this. The temporary sales tax is gone, and you've got this huge hole in the budget. And Ducey's problem is that he's promising tax reform right away, which is a signal that I'm going to cut taxes more. Well, I don't know, how you're going to close a giant budget gap, fill this court order to do the taxes
Don't you say,
and restore.
we're gonna make it up in volume. Don't you understand how this works?
You're talking about cutting taxes, and you're right. We did this estimate a couple of weeks ago, and our estimate is that $800 million in tax cuts would be given away within the next 3 fiscal years, and that's a remarkable amount of money. And now, if we are already doing that at a time when we're facing a deficit, and you're thinking about cutting the income tax, which is around 41%, individual income taxes constitute around 41% of the state's budget. If you add the corporate income, that's like 49%. All told, it's like half of the budget. The sources of half of the budget doing economists have said it's not possible.
That led to the best line of the night, which was Fred Duvall's, that's fairy tale math stuff. He said, I'd love to promise you, balmy summers and
Well, we got the balmy summers, but he's used the tooth fairy math thing before.
He
I mean,
has.
the Republic seemed enamored by that line, but he has used that before, and he's going to use it again in the same way that Ducey is going to, as he did in the debate, mention that Duval was quote unquote responsible for increasing tuition.
Yes, which is, despite the Republic saying, "Oh, it's a factual statement," I'm a little misled there. The fact is, if you go and look at what happened between 2006 and 2012, per student funding, state funding went from like $8,500 down to around $5,000, and the share of the university's budget that came from the state went from 29% down to 17%. Now, you talk even to the Republican regions, they say, look, we did make cuts. We made changes. Fred talks about some of his stuff, the alternatives to going into classroom. If you want 3 universities, well, really 5 if you consider several of the major branch campuses of ASU being full-blown universities, you have to pay for it. And that's why this whole attack is I think is going to wear thin after a while. Now, that doesn't keep the Republican Governors Association from running ads and thinking that's where it goes. But anybody who looks at the numbers says, well, okay, how do you keep the lights on?
And the idea, and Duval again saying, did what we had to do, we fixed your mess, I think was something along
That's
those
right.
lines. Did what we had to do can also go on the other side with the legislature saying, we did what we had to do as far as the budget is concerned because there was no money coming anywhere.
That's absolutely true. But the problem right now is that the legislature, many state legislatures around the country, tightened their belt, made massive cuts, but they didn't address they didn't make massive tax cuts. So now that the economy has rebounded somewhat, boom, they're flush again. I mean, even California, which was in a huge, much more horrible deficit, or as bad as we were, is now got a surplus because they didn't go in and slash these taxes. Now, that's a philosophical argument on either side, but the facts are that many states have now some extra money. They don't have this cliff that we're running up against because we've cut $1 billion in revenue.
And what's fascinating is we've cut corporate income taxes by 30%, individual income taxes by 10%, and that's after some prior tax cuts during the Symington administration. We've accelerated depreciation. We've given new tax credits for research and development, all in this idea that companies would be coming here. Yet when Tesla was looking, where did they go? They went to Nevada. Now, I recognize that Nevada is giving away the store.
About $1.3 billion worth.
Exactly. But they may have something to show for it. So the question becomes, okay, for all this talk, look, we have a very high business personal property rate. If you're a company, this table, this coffee mug, this computer is taxed every year, and that is anti-business. They have lowered that. But at the point where we're trying to take every little bit and say, look, we're going to keep cutting it. If companies will, this was the debate we got in with Common Core last year, where the chamber came out and said, we will not hire people. Motorola said, Intel said, we won't hire Arizona grads because they're not turning out qualified people.
What economists have, and there are 2 schools of thought, if you will, but I think most economists have said, look, if you want to attract businesses, Arizona has done as much as what it could have done. We've pretty much, we are there already. I mean, we've cut as much as we've cut to ensure that those companies come in. And we have to focus on incentives. That's what they're saying. We have to focus on cuts that would incentivize companies to come here.
And I think we have to focus on quality of life issues and education issues, and that's because we've got the stack structure now. So now if we can, many would say if we stop with the 1062s and we stop with the 1070s and stop putting up such a horrible, picture of the
just
state.
a little suggestion about maybe just carving a beach front maybe somewhere, and we'll be all set.
Yeah, they do have that over. You mentioned Common Core. Common Core mentioned in the debate. Again, Doug Ducey, not enamored with Common Core. How can, and we're going to talk about the Chamber of Commerce actually endorsing a Democrat because of Common Core, and yet the Republican candidate endorsed by the Chamber doesn't seem to like Common Core. How do you square that?
Well, Ducey is a very good politician. He's not, you can't really pin him down because he's very good at not getting pinned down. So what we know is he dislikes Common Core, but he's also not said, I'm going to get rid of it right away. He hasn't said that, he hasn't declared that. I think what's going to happen is that Common Core will stay because we've had it for 4 years, and really what do you replace it with? And we're going to have debates, maybe, but the fact of the matter is we do need standards, and right now we don't have anything else besides Common Core.
That was one of the points that the Chamber made. When I asked him about not endorsing Diane Douglas, but endorsing Doug Ducey, he said, well, he understands the needs for standards, as opposed to Diane, who is off in la la land.
Does he understand that there are teachers out there who, if you tell them we're going to get rid of Common Core and put in another standard, they are going to scream and yell all the way down the nearest hallway? I mean, they're already trying to get used to this thing after getting used to Ames and the other. I mean, goodness gracious, when does it stop?
This is a tough problem for the education system. I mean, we've put these standards in place. They're very, they're much different than the previous ones. They're goal standards. They don't necessarily talk about these are the curriculum. It talks about this is what your student needs to be able to understand and reason at the end of the day. The problem is for Mr. Ducey and a lot of the proponents of this is that Common Core has become so politicized around the country. The governor tried last year to tamp it down here by changing the name.
Changing the name, yeah.
But it had no...
Even John Huppenthal equivocated in Common Core, saying he's for it and he was against it, and he's really for and against it. And so that's right, and maybe the Tea Party has won the debate insofar as the public perception of Common Core.
And had there been somebody other than Barack Obama in Washington, perhaps we wouldn't have had the same debate on this.
As far as we'll go to the Diane Douglas versus David Garcia. Mr. Garcia was, as you mentioned, endorsed by the Chamber today. He's a Democrat, first Democrat endorsed by the Chambers for a statewide office since Janet Napolitano in 2006, so it's a rare thing. They not only said he understands the standards, but they also, Diane Douglas is a one-issue person. David Garcia, if you look at him, he's worked in the superintendent's office. He's worked for the Department of Education.
He's worked for Republican superintendents, and that's really crucial.
And he understands, administration of large education systems. Diane Douglas has been on a school board in Peoria, so I think that also worked into their.
Yes, and the interesting thing about it is that they never even interviewed her. They asked for her candidate questionnaire, which she submitted. They looked at it and said, we know where you stand, and we don't really need to go through this interview process.
It goes a step beyond Common Core. When I talked to Glenn Hammer, who's the Chamber's president, he said, you've got an interesting situation. One of the main functions of the State Department of Education is administering federal grants, above and beyond Common Core. You have a woman who is philosophically opposed to the federal grants. How can you put somebody into a job who doesn't believe in the core duties of the job? And that's where it ended.
And of course, at the end of the day, the superintendent of public instruction really, it's not a policy position. I mean, he can lobby for changes. He can, or he or she, whoever becomes the next superintendent, could say, hey, let's stop Common Core, all she wants or all he wants. But that authority doesn't vest on, it's not vested with the superintendent.
We'll go further with that. Is the Republican-led legislature, and I think we can all safely assume it's going to be a Republican legislature again, are they going to listen to a David Garcia, a Democrat?
Well, that's a really good question. It really depends on what he's going to be asking for. I mean, Huppenthal was asking for what, 32 million bucks for this data system that he's been wanting to put in place, and he had to fight so hard every single year to get just bits and pieces. Just a small sum of what he's asking for. I guess at the end of the day, they have to fund the department.
But I think they also recognize that, again, Garcia's street cred versus Diane Douglas. Look, at the point where I went up to the governor and I said, so, you've endorsed the Republican ticket for statewide office. What about Diane Douglas? And I'm listening to crickets going, and she said, I won't be talking about that. I mean, that's how bad it is when this governor, who will back almost anything with a GOP label, will not back Diane Douglas.
Still, Diane Douglas, of course, has, I mean, the voters vote, they are not enamored on the right of the Republican Party with Common Core, to say the least. She will get support, and this will be a very close race. We ought to watch it.
Yeah, I want to see whether the Chamber of Commerce puts its money where its mouth is and starts actually spending on this race, because Diane Douglas is running with Clean Elections money. She's going to be limited in her spending. So I want to see. I'm curious to see if the chamber is going to use its IE, its political advocacy arm, and spend for David Garcia.
Last point on the governor's debate. Any winners, any losers, any haymakers? What was the tenor of the debate, the tone?
It was, bless Bram Resnick for trying to do what I've watched you do around this table with the candidates, trying to get them to answer questions. And at a certain point, you can't just say, I'm going to sit there until you answer. I think perhaps a few extra points for Duval, only in the sense that he had to start from somewhere. He has at least defined himself for those who watched as somebody who supports education and suggests he's got something out there. No real haymakers or anything like that. A few snide lines, but that's it.
I was a little disappointed because I expected, after all of the debates we had that Mr. Ducey went through in the primary with his opponents, that we would actually see him start rolling out some of his programs, and he didn't do it. He wouldn't go there. He wouldn't answer the questions.
Bob, you and I will be sitting here on November 3rd.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
We'll see how he does in his upcoming debates on that particular issue. We got a same-sex marriage here, shifting gears. A court decision, very interesting. Talk to us about this.
Fascinating decision for what's... This started off, there were actually 2 lawsuits in federal court by different groups challenging the long-term state law about men and women marrying, and then the 2008 voter-approved constitutional amendment. That is proceeding in front of Judge John Sedgwick. Both of them are. Meanwhile, they added a couple of plaintiffs, a guy named Fred McQuire and George Martinez, who got married, Green Valley residents, living together for 45 years, got married in July in California, got added to the case to make sure that one of them would be able to list a survivor. Well, George died in August, so now they said, I want to be listed. Fred said, I want to be listed on the death certificate. State Health Department says, we can't do that. We don't honor out-of-state marriages between men and men. And so they went into court and said, look, there are reasons we need this. Some of it is dignity reasons, but he's entitled to be recognized. He had a valid marriage, and Arizona needs to recognize that. And the judge, in a 14-page ruling, said, narrowly on this one, to DHS, Department of Health Services, list this person.
Yes.
Now, right. But the much broader point here is that in unequivocal language, the judge said, it appears from everything I've seen and from all the other decisions that have been happening around the country that Arizona's marriage ban, gay marriage ban, is it's likely to be unconstitutional.
Yeah, in fact, I think what you're probably seeing, that ruling, is a template for what you'll see when this judge decides.
It's the same judge.
Yes, it is the same
it's
judge.
The same judge.
Exactly. And he said there is probably a conflict between this same-sex marriage ban and the U.S. Constitution. Yep. And as I mentioned, you're seeing the template of what he'll rule on the bigger issue.
The judge basically saying that Arizona's claim that the current law doesn't discriminate, quote, lacks merit,
yes,
considering it focuses on this particular...
Yeah, well, the argument was, well, we're not guilty of discriminating against people on sexual orientation. The judge said, Duh. The only reason they can't marry is because of their sexual orientation.
Thus lacking merit. And again, it applies only to this couple. Now, the state's position, we want to make sure we get the state's position on this, is that they said it was unfortunate, the case between these two gentlemen, but there was no irreparable harm, thus no need for emergency action, and that the real harm would be to the state and to the state's idea of the sanctity of marriage. And the judge...
Judge said, Judge took that apart. Here's another piece from the ruling. You know, the public has an important interest in faithful discharge of duties imposed on Arizona's public officials by Arizona law. He says, fine. The public also has an important interest in those same officials' compliance with the highest law of the land, the United States Constitution. Where discharging state law runs afoul of the United States Constitution, the interest of the public necessarily lies in compliance with the higher law. And that becomes the 14th Amendment.
And this... A lot of this stems from the DOMA ruling by the United States Supreme Court, when the justices said, well, this definition of marriage is illegal. And since then, we have seen district courts, circuit courts, and even state courts citing that particular opinion and saying, look, the U.S. Supreme Court has already stated that this definition of marriage is unconstitutional.
But the Ninth Circuit had heard two cases on Monday this week. A Nevada case from a year and a half ago before DOMA, where the Nevada federal court upheld their gay marriage ban, and one from Idaho where they struck it down after DOMA. And it looks like Ninth Circuit's going to throw it out too. The question is, at the end of this month, the Supreme Court will consider 4 appeals from around the country. And they may take those cases. It's widely believed they will take those cases, and we should know by this time next year.
And the fact is that, despite what you're saying, I appreciate the Windsor, the decisions in terms of out of California. You don't put a lot of money on what the Supreme Court will do, because a lot of what the DOMA decision was based on is that the federal government, in refusing to recognize marriages performed in states where it's allowed, had taken from the states their ability to define marriage. Well, if you use that same logic, you could make the argument, well, if we're giving Arizona the ability to decide marriage. Now, I recognize there are constitutional arguments.
The Windsor case, I don't disagree with you on the Windsor case. The Windsor case involved a gay couple from New York City who had been married, who had been together for decades, who were married in Canada. One couple died, and the other one was forced to pay a very large inheritance tax. And if that woman had been married, there would have been an inheritance tax exemption. So the court ruled, no, that's an unfair, that's unfair to them to not recognize their marriage and therefore have them pay much more.
But that still goes back to the marriage being legal where performed, and that each state or province or other country made that decision.
And you're right. But here's what's happened since. Because you could interpret the ruling in Windsor 2 ways. You could say that the states really do not have the ability to prohibit same-sex marriage, or you could basically look at it and say, look, it's up to the states to decide. And just for this particular case, if it's a federal issue, then you can't prohibit same-sex marriage.
This case that we're having today is a perfect example. One of his arguments was, I'm not going to be able to get my federal benefits because that I would have been able to get if I had been married to a woman, because Arizona doesn't recognize my marriage. Therefore,
Okay, with this in mind, we haven't got too much time left, but I want to keep on this particular topic. Does this issue become a factor in the election?
Well, it came up during the debate. Doug Ducey said, I support, quote, traditional marriage. But what's interesting is he was very careful to say, given all the heat over 1062 and everything else, but that I will treat everyone with dignity and respect. So he clearly recognizes that, to use Kathy Herod's line, the winds are changing.
Yeah, and he said the state also said that this case is unfortunate, quote unquote, but they still are taking it to court.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They have to defend this case. It's a voter-approved law. Kathy Herod today put out a statement saying this judge's ruling, just like all the rest of the judges' ruling around the country, are being made by activist judges.
Quickly.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that statement she put out is, I think for the very first time, she's implicitly acknowledging that this is a losing issue for her organization.
Right, and she's ignoring the fact that this is a George H.W. Bush appointee, and many of the other judges who have struck it down
Well,
are also
and she also has to,
conservative
she
Republicans.
might have to watch her mouth language, I should say. She's part of the Doug Ducey little campaign cabinet, is she not?
She is, although it was interesting when she was asked about, when Ducey was asked about that, how do you associate yourself with the Kathy Herods of
Yes.
the world and the Joe Arpaios? He said, well, I didn't pick my coalition, they sort of picked me, and I built this broad coalition. So even he is kind of pivoting toward the center for the general election.
All right, we have to pivot our way out of here. Good stuff, guys. Thanks for being here. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you for joining us. You have a great weekend.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of 8, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.